Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Sulite Dreyfus, Senior Lecturer in the School of Computing and Information here at the University of Melbourne. I'm so pleased you're here today and in such numbers. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this event today, the Wurundjeri peoples. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and to the elders of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities who may be here today. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker. Frances Haugen, coming from North America to share her talk as part of the AI at Melbourne Colloquium series. Frances holds a degree in electrical and computer engineering from Olin College and an MBA from Harvard. She is no slouch. She is a specialist in algorithmic product management, having worked on ranking algorithms at Google, Pinterest, Yelp, and Facebook. In 2019, she was recruited to Facebook to be the lead product manager on the civic misinformation team, which dealt with issues related to democracy and misinformation, and later also worked on counter-espionage. Like most whistleblowers, Frances didn't set out to become a whistleblower. I've studied whistleblowers for more than 2 decades, and their path is rarely easy. In fact, it is usually diabolically hard. It is usually the path of last resort because the whistleblower has witnessed serious wrongdoing and their conscience requires them to step forward. In an AI-driven world with little transparency of technology, whistleblowers have never been as important as they are now. I am very pleased to also say that she has just arrived in this room from having spoken to students in 2 master's degree classes here at the university, so sharing her ethical wisdom with them. Today's talk should be fascinating. Frances is in Australia to keynote at the Australian Cybersecurity Conference in Canberra next week, which is run by the Australian Information Security Association, or ASA, who are here today. Welcome. And there are still tickets available if you're interested. It's a great conference. We are delighted that ASA is co-sponsoring her talk here today at Melbourne University, along with the School of Computing and Information Systems, the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics, CADE, and of course, Melbourne Connect. Thank you to all who have helped make this possible today. For order of proceeding, Frances will give her talk, followed by a discussion led by the wonderful John Fain, who will open the floor to questions from the audience. I know there are students and researchers here from many parts of the university, from computing to journalism to law and science, so I'm sure it will be a lively conversation. I'm now going to welcome Professor Ed Hovey, Executive Director of Melbourne Connect.
Thank you, Celeste. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Welcome here. Just two things from me. My name is Edward Hovey, the Executive Director of Melbourne Connect, as you heard. So we have next week a very interesting evening session called The Future of Cities, talking about what's going to happen with cities as we go in the 50 or 60-year time frame from now. Again, John Fain will be there moderating. I invite you to this if you can get tickets. It's pretty full already, but it's going to be a really interesting discussion. Also, the AI at Melbourne Colloquium series, of which this is part, is, as you may know, an ongoing series of talks. We have some interesting talks lined up. We have a lot of activity in AI, growing activity here at the university. And so it's nice to see more and more interest. If you're interested in AI in general and you want to get plugged in and things, please let me know. Write some email or just come and see me, because we're working towards starting an institute now in AI and putting together activities or coordinating or linking to activities all around the university. There's a lot of it that isn't well enough appreciated. Okay, so thank you. And Frances, we're ready for the talk. Thank you.
Very good. Welcome. I want to again say thank you to AISA for bringing me to Australia. The only reason why the 2 weeks that I've spent talking with NGOs, with government, coming here was possible, but was because of their sponsorship of my trip here. And also thank you to Melbourne for giving me a chance to visit the campus. My name is Frances Haugen. You probably know me from the Facebook files back in 2021. Before that, I worked at companies like Google, Pinterest, and Yelp, prior to working at Facebook in a capacity as an algorithmic product manager. That means I designed user experiences using algorithms. Originally, things that were just hand-coded, like with heuristics, and then by the end of my career, things powered by AI. Today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what the stakes are for this year's elections all around the world, what we can learn from the first time getting truly huge numbers of documents out of the company. I brought forward about 22,000 pages of documents. The AG lawsuits and the filings associated with them represent hundreds of thousands of pages that have been meticulously combed through and synthesized. We're going to talk through some of the things that we learned from those documents and how it applies to what we should expect from elections. And lastly, what can Australia do to safeguard both itself and the world? This year is a very unique year. Almost half of the world is going to go to elections, the most people that ever in human history. And the consequences of how these votes go will live with the people affected for years to come. What has changed since 2020? So the first is the question of the scale of influence operations. So influence operations are where we weaponize our social platforms to try to influence people to believe something or to act or not act. The invasion of Ukraine demonstrated that information warfare is now a primary front on any conflict. Both Russia and Ukraine deployed huge influence operations against each other at the beginning of that conflict. And by the time, and even over the course of the last few years, things like we've removed limitations off of major players for using the technologies they have in AI contexts. By the time the Israel-Palestine conflict came along just more recently, we've seen it used at an even greater scale because instead of mostly being deployed against adversaries, it has been used to influence public opinion around the world. And we've seen the emergence of new tools. And I want to be clear, before I show this tool, I'm not implying that this tool, because I don't know who made it, I'm not saying that this group is malicious. I just want to say that before I go there. We're seeing the emergence of tools that I had imagined would happen eventually. Like when I told doomsday stories about this is what we should be scared of with AI, this is going to be the kind of thing that we begin to see. This is a tool where anyone can help the cause of the Palestinians by lending their social media accounts, and they will use AI to write tweets, write Reddit posts, write Instagram things. They will pick out the posts for you on those mediums. They will give you options if you want to support or refute or author your own. They will give you, if you click that you want to use the AI, they'll give you options to regenerate until you find one that you like. They will let you tune them into your own personal style. Oh, it's not advancing. Ooh, do we have a slide? Oh, there we go. So if you want it to be different in tone, maybe more academic, more angry, more empathetic. So the reason why this is so dangerous is actually this update. So I took those screenshots, I admit it, I took those screenshots last night. I found this for the first time a week ago, right? This is brand new. I sent this to a number of threat researchers that I work on misinformation, and the response I got every time was, do you know who made that? This is new. This is new. I took these screenshots last night because I had been trying to find it for a week, or I may have saw it 2 weeks ago, but I've been trying to find it because I couldn't remember what it was called. And I found it last night, finally, because I tried something different. I looked at it again this morning, and this came up, C7 new posts. So it's not just randomly looking up posts in this conflict. It's looking up specific posts, or it's picking, someone's picking the posts that you are involved in, and you don't know why or who or whether or not this is coordinated. And the reason why this is so terrifying is we have known that people did mass-scale operations where they recruited people. Like the Chinese were particularly known that they would recruit 50,000, 100,000 people, and they would brigade content. They'd pile on people who dissented. They would block discussions of topics by spamming people with reports of abuse or just putting the Chinese flag over and over again. But you could catch them because they usually copy and paste it over and over again. You could find it. And now every single one of those interactions is unique, and it's coming from a real account, like a real person. The level of information warfare that you can do here we would have never imagined it even a year ago. So the scale is really, really different. The defenses are weaker. So the thing that we've been told for years is that there's a very simple 3-part formula that Facebook uses to keep you safe. And actually other platforms have basically adopted this as their stated way they say they keep you safe. So in order to boost authentic communication and reduce that harmful communication, they're going to remove, reduce, and inform. So removing this is what we usually think of with content moderation. They're going to find things that violate the policies. That could be for content, that could be for ads. They're going to detect it with AI. You know, I watched a panel on AI last year, and they had someone from Google, very interesting research scientist. They had someone from some random third party, and they had a Facebook lawyer who got up there and said, AI is great because we use it to keep our platform safe. And they literally spouted this. So they use the AI to find the stuff that violates those policies, and they take it down, allegedly. For reduce, they allegedly go a step beyond that, and they use all the other signals they know. And if they think it's potentially dangerous, they push it down the rankings. Or if it's good, they bubble it up. This came out of a philosophy. Allegedly, this whole thing came from the mind of Mark Zuckerberg himself back in 2018. This is 5,000 words long. I don't think he wrote it, but you never know. In that white paper, they show these graphs. They go, the reason why we have to do this, the reason we have to toggle stuff up and down, we have to demote this borderline content that's not bad enough that we're going to take it down, is that no matter where we draw the line, as we get close to that line, because the algorithms give more distribution to more extreme content, whatever is the content closest to the line will be the content that gets the most distribution. So we need to do this. As it approaches the line, we need to demote it. And that's what we have to do. So the thing that's fascinating about this diagram, other than the fact that they show they get everything once you cross the line, which we now know is not true. They get from their own documents, you know, as little as 5% of hate speech. For violence inciting content, it's less than 1%. The real reason they do this is they have no clue the meaning of the content. And they feel they have to be very, very certain to take down something. But if they're uncertain, they don't have to be as confident just to demote it. That's the real reason why they do this. But for both those things, they have to be able to detect what they're looking for. And that's going to be really important. So keep that in your mind. If I want to reduce, if I want to remove, I need to know this is a bad thing. So keep that in your mind. But the third leg of their stool is inform. And we have to remember, all these screenshots are taken from a video. So if you want to go watch them persuade you with animations, you know, feel free. So imagine this is swirling to show you how important this is. They go and they hire journalists to write little articles, to write posts, refuting highly viral pieces of content. And those could be for ads, they could be for against articles, it could be for a whole publisher. This is an approximation. They don't publish any of this, like what's the relative impact of these things. But this is this is perhaps more generous than we should be for the informed part. But overwhelmingly, they reduce, sometimes they remove, sometimes they inform. So we got to be really good then at detecting this stuff, right? Like if we need detection to do remove, we need it to do reduce, we got to be able to find what's the bad stuff. So I learned a new phrase on this trip, which is an open slather, which is such a great phrase. So an open slather, as I learned, is an Australianism and a Kiwiism. Let's not forget New Zealand. For like, you know, it's a little chaotic. It's all over the place. We have a problem with these safety systems, which is Australian English is not American English. British English is not American English. But when we treat dialects as if they were languages, we leave the dialects behind. When I worked at Facebook, we only tuned for British English beyond American English, and that was only sometimes. And the reason why that's a problem is that when it comes to things like racial violence, you know, during the referendum, Indigenous communities complained for months and months and months before the election that there were slurs. So like we can have disagreements on where the line is for hate speech, right? Like if I ask certain questions, is that hate speech, is it not? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about racial slurs. In the United States, you use a bad racial slur in a comment, in a post, it will not be distributed on Facebook. That has been the policy for 10 years. If you use the same slurs in Australia, all was allowed. And the Indigenous communities asked month after month after month, can we just have parody? Like, forget about all the other content, all the images, all that, just not slurs. And because Facebook does not do its safety systems for maximizing safety, they do it for avoiding bad, consequences to themselves, it never happened. So second problem, and this is the thing I'm even more worried about. So if the core of the safety system is we have to be able to detect what stuff is, then we need the AI to work. And a field that I think is being under discussed is something called adversarial AI. So what's adversarial AI? So when a computer sees the panda, it doesn't really see the panda like you and I see the panda. You know, we have a concept of what a panda is. We're like, that's a panda, it's cute. I think I'm missing, oh yeah, you can go in there and train a secondary system to write alongside and say, what information would I need to feed into this AI to trick it, right? So when the AI sees the panda, it's really doing a bunch of math. If I add in a little bit of noise, I can, touch the AI in all the right spots that it's like, oh, I know what that is. That is a monkey. I'm confident that's a monkey. And this is not like and this is not a thing that's hypothetical, right? Like if you begin combining something like this with generative AI, you can make content that goes right around any of these defenses. And you might be saying, well, Francis, don't you have to have training data in order to be able to tell like how to train these AIs to know how to trick us? Under the Digital Services Act, you have a right to know what content gets taken down. In Australia, we don't have a right to know what's taken down. We don't know why they leave stuff up, why they take it down. But in Europe, they do. And so now there is a database with millions and millions and millions of examples. I think it's been up for a year. There's been millions of examples of what has been taken down. And you can now train an AI to say, I want to say this, I have this image, I have this meme, I have this video, how do I get around the defenses? And you can trivially train something to just walk around the fence. So that means the only people who are going to be getting so that means the information operations are not going to have their content taken down. It's just average people who are going to have their content taken down. And this is not like a hypothetical, Francis, you're kind of wonky. A lot of people are looking into this. This is a graph of how many papers have been published about adversarial AI, and it just keeps going up. This is a major area of discussion. But Francis, there must be more than just computers keeping us safe. Like someone has to be looking into this, right? So when I worked at Facebook, I put in threat intelligence into DALL-E. Like I always like making slides with DALL-E. I'm taking no credit. So I was a I was a product manager for threat researchers at Facebook. So these are people with ex-FBI experience, ex-investigation experience. Some of them worked on catching information operations or other kinds of things for the government. Facebook has had a policy since 2017 when they, acknowledged they maybe should have done more in 2016, that they would tell the public anytime they took down an information operation. And this slide is really, really important because it represents the fact that there are good people inside of Facebook beyond me who try really damn hard and are trying to let you know how bad it is. So this is a still from a video. So I found this by accident researching for this talk because I was trying to talk about information operations. And there's a lovely 30-second animation, which I'm not making you watch, and it shows every one of the influence operations Facebook took down since 2017. So it's so interesting about this. So you can see, I think, like a data scientist. I was like, what an interesting time scale. Look at this thing. They made some interesting stylistic choices there. Like, not all the years are the same size. Like, that's kind of weird. Like, when we normalize them all out, it sure seems like something changed. So that's when I came out. Like, that's when I became forward as a whistleblower. So it used to be they took down a lot of influence operations. They used to put up a report every month saying which influence operations they took down. They used to, and now they don't. They put them up quarterly. And what's really interesting is if we were to go, I wish I had a laser, or I guess we have multiple monitors, so I can't laser it very well. If we were to go look at the reports from 2022, or actually if we look at the reports from any of the years that are on this chart, they all open with the same paragraph. They say, in an effort to exhibit transparency, to help you see the progress we're making, we are disclosing the information operations that we've taken down, we've disrupted. Starting in 2023, after that lovely empty year, they started saying, these illustrate the ones that we take down. Right? These are the people who are keeping us safe. Your uncle spouting off about conspiracy theories is not the problem. Organized influence operations is the problem. Organized campaigns to spread misinformation is the problem. And these were the people who kept us safe. And some person inside of Facebook said, this is so bad, I'm going to put this video up on Facebook's website and hope someone finds it. And so now all of you know too. So 2024, threat is bigger, the defenses are weaker. Surely someone's going to do something about this, right? Like someone on the inside must be paying attention. They're gonna do something and step up. I shouldn't be having to stand up here guessing what's happening inside of Facebook. But I'm in basically the same position that the government is, except for we had a unique moment happen just last fall where 44 states sued Meta saying you lied to the public about hurting kids. So in the US, under 230, you are allowed to make dangerous products. That's not a problem. That's not illegal. But it is illegal under consumer protection laws to say they're safe when you know they're dangerous. So let's walk through this a little bit. The playbook for Facebook has always been when I come to you and I say there is a problem, you minimize. You say, for example, you word it as these are illustrative of the influence operations we disrupt. It's not all of them. You spin it, you deflect. All the things I'm about to say also apply to TikTok and Snapchat. They also can hide their things. We just don't have the information I'm about to show you because they haven't been sued yet. And one more thing. Everything I want to show you that's in a serif font is word for word from the case. And anything that is in sans serif is my commentary. So here's the summary. Meta has profoundly changed the lives of children. They did it because they wanted to make profit. And they repeatedly lied to the public about the substantial dangers they knew about. They concealed the ways in which they intentionally exploited and manipulated children. And they ignored sweeping damage caused to both the mental and physical health of our nation's youth. Why did they do this? So just for context, the suicide rate in feelings of suicidality, depression, and hopelessness has been going through the roof in the United States. I don't know if it's true in Australia as much. It's probably pretty bad. Though you guys don't have phones in schools now, I hear, which is amazing. We'll talk about that later because there's some damning stuff here. And things like pediatric, psychiatric visits are through the roof. And if we had data for more years, so notice that graph ends in 2015, it keeps going up. And the best source for this, if you want to learn more, is Jonathan Haidt just had a new book come out. And given my publisher would kill me for promoting someone else's book, I also had a book come out last year. If you want, there's a memoir. It's interesting. It's the most entertaining policy book you'll read because it's lots of fun stories. But Jonathan Haidt has done an amazing job of really, really closely documenting the role of social media and its impact on kids. But what we're going to actually walk through has largely been underreported or unreported, and that was intentional. When the majority of the media on this came out, this is what they had available. So this is a screenshot from the filing. And you might say, Francis, like, why is it all blacked out? And he said, well, in the United States, it's interesting. I showed this to some lawyers from Singapore in the government, and they were like, I don't understand why any of this was allowed to be redacted. Like, none of this is relevant. And I was like, oh, you're so reasonable. Oh, if only we worked that way. No, so they got the first stab at it, and people had to appeal and say, oh, no, this is public interest. You need to show us. So on Thanksgiving Eve, Thanksgiving's probably the biggest holiday in the year in the United States. It's like our national holiday. On Thanksgiving Eve, they released everything. So all the juicy bits came out on like 7 p.m. on Thanksgiving Eve. I, the obsessive one, missed it for 5 or 6 days, right? Oops, sorry. It had quotes like, the young ones are the best ones, right? It's like that for, page after page after page. What else do you think was missing, right? If you want to go read it, there's a QR code here. I put a number of them up there. There's more than this, but you can email me if you want more of them. I went through and I highlighted for a bunch of the state ones the difference between what was available and not available. Don't worry, it'll be up again later. So just a reminder, if it's written like this, it's from the government. If it's written like that, it's from me, just to give you a sense of what we're going to see. So high level, the case is Meta targets young users because they need to be able to have the business going forward. Like if they don't get them as young as they can, someone else will. They'll lose the future. The more time they spend, the more money they make because this is advertising supported. The most important thing I hope you walk away from today, if you haven't already internalized it, is products that are free are not free. Advertising supported products are paid for by you, by your health and your focus. You are not optimized for. You are the product for advertisers. Second, they've intentionally developed a set of psychologically manipulative features designed to maximize young users' time spent. They were aware that young users had developing brains that were particularly vulnerable. As you read the docs, it is shocking how direct they are. Like, there are documents with titles like "How to Exploit Psychological, Developmental Psychology of Tweens." Like, it's really intense. And they chose, after knowing that, to exploit those vulnerabilities. Our products are not accidents, right? They will use every tool if there are no feedback loops to take advantage of how much time they can get. To give you some examples, they intentionally used words like, how do we manipulate dopamine? They used social comparison features that they had lots of internal and external research on hurt young users. This one's particularly bad. They triggered alerts. So think your phone vibrates, you would send a notification. A reasonable person might say, perhaps sending these to school children during the school day is not a good idea. Or perhaps after, say, 11 p.m. at night or 10 p.m. at night might interfere with their sleep. Young people told them this too. They ran experiments where they stopped doing it. People said, I'm less stressed. I'm more able to focus in school. It also decreased growth by like 1%. And as a result, they chose not to do it. And that's not me projecting onto it. That's like the quotes from the documents. They did visual filters even though they knew that they were promoting body dysmorphia. And they intentionally chose formats, like when they were choosing amongst them, to minimize the ability to self-regulate and disengage. This is particularly important for kids under the age of 14. And Facebook, this is another part, a huge part of the filing, because this again is a crime in the United States. There's a huge number of users under the age of 13. And the reason for this is when, the American Psychological Association has been very clear that for adolescents, because they are in a phase of, did I just lose the mic? Here we good? Good. Because they're in a phase of development where they are supposed to begin detaching. Yeah, I thought so, yeah. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. 1, 2, 3. Well, hello, everyone. Oh, we're back. Yeah. I was about to start telling you about how lovely Melbourne is, but we can also go back to the talk. Because adolescents during that period of time are supposed to begin detaching from their families. They're supposed to be starting to orient towards their peers so they can go out into the world. Kids are really, really susceptible to social manipulation, right? They literally have more dopamine and oxytocin receptors, so that the compliment a 13-year-old girl gets about her genes will be more sublime than one I will ever get for the rest of my life. But if she gets criticized, it'll be more painful than basically anything I'll ever be told. So we need to ask, do people in this phase of life deserve extra protection? Meta deceptively represented that these features were not manipulative and were designed to promote users' prolonged and unhealthy engagement. We need legal rights to true information. We need legal rights to things like disclosing of risks and what's going to be done about them. They knew that smartphone notifications caused hyperactivity and reduced productivity and well-being. And this part's like where this is how it relates back to the election. Over and over again, the thing that they document here is how they intentionally deceived the public. They knew that no one would get the information unless they gave it to them, because these are closed systems. And they secretly maintained separate dashboards that tracked the actual behavior of the platform versus what they told the public. And we're going to get into some examples there. Okay, so self-harm. So they said 0.05% of the content on our platform is related to self-harm. Again, remember we talked about earlier, you have to be able to detect it to give a number like this. And we don't know how accurate they are at even detecting it in the first place. But what they knew internally was that for girls between the ages of 13 and 15, 8.5% said they saw content related to self-harm in the last 7 days. If we talk about unwanted sexual advances, it's 1 in 8 girls say they got an unwanted sexual message in the last 7 days. When we look at that data, of those girls, if we look at girls overall, like 1 or 2% say they got 10 or more in the last 7 days. And yet Facebook said, we don't have problems on our platform. This is particularly dangerous when combined with Instagram's preference amplifying algorithms. So they talk about explicitly in Facebook's docs that people don't just end up in a rabbit hole. The algorithms push them there. And they downplay repeatedly the known links with negative effects. So I'll give an example. This is one that I think is particularly telling on when we say, I've talked a lot about the election. I've talked about harms that we know about externally. They almost certainly know about internally. Here's an example of one where people externally said, hey, we have a problem. We've just gone into the augmented reality space. It's like 2019, 2018. Snap's eating our lunch. There's all these fun things. I can be a cat. It's going to be fun. We're going to do filters on Instagram too. So almost immediately, someone puts out a filter that lets you simulate plastic surgery. So you can either show the cut marks where you're going to get all changed. You can put the bruises, everything. You can see your future face. Understandably, people come out and say, this is a bad thing. We should not do this. And Facebook announces, we heard you. We're going to take them down. And I was very, very confused because I had read through all this and I went to go find screenshots for them. And I saw this and I was like, oh, they actually did something. That's weird. They said they didn't do it. What's up with that? So it turns out that this was only a 6-month ban. But if you read the article, it never says that. It just says they banned them. So they went and got 22 external researchers, 21 external researchers. They said, hey, you're all experts in the field. Can you give us a report saying, should we have these up there? The experts quite reasonably said, no. They consulted widely internally to the company. All the senior executives were on board. We should take these down. We make no money. It's a really bad look. Why are we doing this? The day before the meeting where they were going to ban it, Zuckerberg canceled the meeting. And he said, I haven't seen any evidence that indicates this is bad. We don't know if he didn't read the report, if he avoided the report, whatever. He says, this sounds really paternalistic, banning it. There's clearly market demand. Market demand was his phrase. The individual executives followed up with him afterwards and were like, hey, let me rewrite the report for you. Put in an email, put in a slideshow. Still didn't happen. Let's remember, this is the person in control. It is his life's work. He has been the CEO since he was 19 years old. It is his identity. It is who he is. It is almost an impossible thought to think that the thing that is you could be hurting other people. And he, because he controls the sharers, controls all of it. And this story that I just told you is laid out in page after page of the filings. And all of it was hidden when this lawsuit was announced. The filings tell us 3 things clearly. Mark has complete control over the company. He's either unwilling or unable to acknowledge his products can hurt people. And he and others within the company have been acting like, you read the quotes in this, it's page after page after page of clearly they thought no one was ever going to catch them. No one was ever going to find out. Now they clearly think they're in deep, deep trouble because for years they have been telling us it's time to regulate social media. If you go to DC, there's ads on bus stops. I'll say it's time to regulate social media. You go into elevators, there's a little thing. It's time to regulate social media. But they never say how to regulate social media. When you ask them, you're like, how should we regulate social media? They're like, I don't know. Why don't you suggest something? So 2 weeks after this filing happened, this blog post showed up on their blog and said, we need a law that will force the app makers to require you to, like parents should be able to control what apps are on their kids' phones. This is the law we need. And we need to have it so there's a level playing field. And you might say, isn't there a level playing field currently? I think they think they're going to lose this lawsuit. And I think if I come back here in a few years, there may be no under 16-year-olds on Meta products, because that's the line that Meta suggests for this law. So what are our options? There's largely 3 kinds of interventions we can do. We can focus on content. We saw the limitations with content, dialects, adversarial AI. We can prohibit types of behavior. You can say you can do this, you can't do this with your apps. Not great. Tech moves really fast. It's always going to be behind. Or we can change the incentives for how companies operate. We got here because they knew they were operating in the dark. They knew that no one could see the consequences. They acted that way internally. There will be no instantaneous bullets. There will be no magic bullets. But that's the way we know this. So of everything I talked about today, how many of you had already heard about all this? You might have heard little bits here and there, like not a lot, little bits of it. But that knowledge gap is intentional, right? They want information asymmetry because it makes it harder for us to demand more. The current state of the art for tech regulation, so Australia was the first mover. You guys totally get the blue ribbon for you guys acted when no one else was acting, years ahead of the game. But the current state of the art is about information asymmetry. How do we make it so that you can't be in the dark, or we collectively can't be in the dark? When those trade-offs are being made, we should have known about them. We should have been able to ask who's going to pay for them. So the Digital Services Act, the UK Online Safety Bill are both written this way. They say you have to disclose the risks you know about. You have to disclose how you're going to prevent and mitigate those harms. And the public has to have the right to ask its own questions. You know, all three legs of this stool are really important, right? If we can't ask our own questions, we can't form our own priorities or suggest other ways to solve problems. Because the thing they say over and over again is like, we can't do anything about this. And it's like, can you really not do anything about this? Just about 3 weeks ago, Canada proposed its own version of this. So it's a little more streamlined than the DSA. They did multiple rounds of citizen assemblies. So they basically brought together representative numbers of Canadians. They had them learn about the different problems of social media, different constraints, different issues around free speech. Very different people said, how would you solve this? What would you focus on? It has only 2 kinds of prohibited content. One is child abuse imagery, and one is non-consensual sexual imagery. So it's a much more tight bill, a little bit less controversial. I think it could be an amazing template for a coalition of mid-sized powers. Because right now, we kind of only have 2 main poles in this big fight. We have the United States, which has chosen inaction. This is not entirely our fault. Our Constitution is very old. Like, we can't even pay for our government currently. Like, just please remember that. Like, the last time I was here, it was brutal. I went through 2 weeks of meetings where I'd be like, I still don't have a Speaker of the House. Contemplate that. Have pity on me. People are like, why are you here? I'm like, you guys pass laws. Maybe one day we can too. So we have one pole, which is inaction. Another pole, which is another philosophy. But the DSA is speaking up for Europeans. You know, I think it passed first because there were a bunch of countries in Europe that had no safety systems. You know, their languages were considered too small. They didn't matter. You know, there was a very prominent psychologist that stepped down from the self-harm advisory panel of Facebook just last week. She's Danish. And she said, I'm stepping down because years ago, I criticized you. I joined this panel because there was a network of 500, 600 Instagram accounts promoting suicide. And you didn't take them down. And years have gone by, and those accounts are still up, right? What are you doing? Europe passed the DSA so that they would be represented. There are a lot more countries in the world than the United States and the European Union. And the way middle powers are going to get their voices heard is by working together. If you can get together 200 million people, you can write whatever law you want. Also, that's what ChatGPT says, is like middle powers coming together. What I find really interesting about this is I said as a third pole versus the European Union and the United States, and they put Great Britain in there. Isn't that interesting? But, and this is why I always like to see, like, what does the aggregate of humanity believe? And so I always like to say, we can have nice things. We deserve nice things. And the way we will get social media that we feel good about is we will fight for and demand it. And so I'm very excited to be here, and I have a lot of, I look forward to seeing where Australia takes the next step in online accountability. Questions? I like it. Oh, yeah. Supposed to be a full dance.
Yeah, a little bit. Francis, we'll just wait for this to move. Okay, and the bulk of the audience are over here, so we'll just swing around a little bit. Public sentiment, I'll call for questions and I'll be like the auctioneer on Saturday. I'll take them in the order I see them. So wave to me and I'll get to you as quickly as we can. Public sentiment seems to be more agitated about a princess digitally altering a family photo than some of the atrocities that you've shown us in this toxic environment that you used to work in. If the public aren't motivated, what hope is there for reform?
So I think one of the most clever things Facebook did in terms of neutralizing action was, remember, so we're acting behind a curtain, right? You can't get a graduate degree on how to make these things better. Like, you have to get trained up inside the companies because there's so little knowledge base that is external to them these days. Because of that information asymmetry, they got to define what our options were. And they very clearly looked at a bunch of different messages they could pitch. And they came out and they said, oh, I'm so sorry about whatever the harm is. But it's a choice between safety and freedom of speech. That's all we can do. Where do you want to fall on that line? And, people feel very rightfully so uncomfortable about the idea that a central power gets to decide what we can and can't say, though they already are, let's be clear. When you believe that the only thing you can demand for, like, very few people will march in the streets for more censorship. Like, it's just not going to happen. But if you came in and said, hey, should you have a right to know? Like, right now, we don't know what counts. So, for example, in Canada, the news is blocked, but they won't tell us what is the news. Is the news a blacklist of sites? Is it topics? Like, are there things we just can't talk about? Because when I worked at Facebook, we definitely had a civic classifier of, like, what topics counted as political, and those things got demoted. But none of us got to evaluate, is that fair, or are you capturing all sides equally, that kind of thing. And so I think it's one of these things where not enough people know that they could want more, or that there's a world that is desirable that they could demand.
So they've got a monopoly on internal information, but also on the technology. I mean, you've got an exceptional audience here, and every one of these people's a tech genius, of course. That's why they're here to listen to you. But by and large, the gap, the digital divide, is wider than ever and getting wider. Most of us are just happy to be consumers. So they've kind of set their own race in a way, haven't they?
Yeah, there's definitely, so if you do get my memoir, The Power of One, I go into much gretter detail on this. But one of the ways that
It's
they
the
got
hard
to their...
flog there. Come on,
Yeah.
buy the book. And she'll queue up for signing autographs later.
The part of how they got to their level of dominance was they understood that network effects were real, right? The more people you can get in a locality, the more likely you are to use their service. Sorry, guys, there's no drinks afterwards. It's okay. Company is what we're here for. And there's water, right? They went into some of the most fragile places in the world, and they said, if you use our services, we will pay for your data. But if you use anything else, you are going to have to, you'll have to pay for yourself. And so in many ways, they have reinforced their dominance by making sure that they have the whole network effect. Yeah. Because they were afraid that if they didn't play in every corner of the world, there was going to be a competitor that would come out of that corner and we would like it more.
And there will be.
And no. And where did TikTok come from? The
Yeah.
only place they couldn't play.
Yeah. So
right.
There's two things. First of all, we'll come to the bad actors question in a moment, but just reveal for us a little more about the internal culture in these companies, not just Meta and Facebook, but you've worked in several of them. We, at our own cost in this country, have learned a lot about the internal culture of Rupert Murdoch's empire. Tell us about the internal culture in these tech companies.
Part of what I always try to remind people on is Facebook is full of kind, conscientious, thoughtful people. Like, they are of companies in Silicon Valley, they are known, or at least they were for a long time. I don't know what the current state is today. They were known for being particularly good at filtering out mean people, right? Or like people who were not conscientious. They were really good at it. They were really good at reading people. Unfortunately, it is a space where only one person's opinion matters. Right, like Mark has 56, 57% of the votes. Depends how many stock buybacks have happened. It keeps going up. Shockingly, right? One day he might own 80% if they keep doing buybacks. But if you tell Mark things he doesn't want to hear, he just isolates you. And that completely falls down the reporting chain. Like if you are not sufficiently enthusiastic about the company or don't seem happy enough about the direction, they isolate you and they push you out. And so it ends up being a space where people only ask questions within their lane. You get compensated on your impact as defined in your success criteria. And if you turn your head, they ask, are you focused enough? And they punish you.
That's not unlike the internal culture in lots of companies that are dominated by a single strong individual. We've seen this over and over again. What does it lead to? I mean, it leads to a very narrow strand of thought that we're told in conventional management speak that diversity is the key to success. You're painting a completely opposite picture.
So it's interesting. Like I think they're dealing with two conflicting demands. So if you brought in some McKinsey consultants and you said, how do we like make this a little more healthy over the long term? They would say, right now you are overemphasizing short-term performance. So when the way you evaluate, is this change good or bad, is you run a month, a 3-month, a 6-month experiment, and then you see the results. You don't get to capture effects like if you run a bunch of short 1-month experiments and each one makes the site a little bit more toxic, and that doesn't really matter over a month or two, but it does decrease how much you use it a year, 2 years, 3 years later. Because let's be honest, of people who used to spend a lot of time on Facebook in this room, you probably don't now, right? The problem is they would say, you should move that out. But Meta would have said, but we have a problem. Social media is built and designed by the young. We have to have an objective system for evaluating whether or not something is good or bad because we need a 23-year-old. We need their opinion to beat the opinion of a 40-year-old if it's a good idea. We need a system that can do that. And I think they feel like they didn't say, I don't think anyone said the company would say, we're trying to overemphasize short-term results. They would say, if we want the best idea to win, we have to evaluate it numerically.
I haven't seen hands go up. People are obviously a little stunned. There's one there I've just seen from the photographer. That's great. And there's another, and I'll come to you in a second. So what's the difference between Elon Musk and the way he's run Twitter into the ground? And the Zuck?
The Zuck. One day when he just is like a mixed martial arts fighter, he's going to be the Zuck. I would say the biggest difference is Elon's. I would say they're both hands-on, but right now Mark is obsessed with the metaverse. Like we keep forgetting how much work they're doing on the metaverse, or he's obsessed on AI at this given time. I would say Mark has more toys, right? Like they have a much, much more profitable company. They have a lot more advertising base. You can hire better and more people when you have more money. And so they have very similar management philosophies. It's just there's many more people helping Mark, and so that you can have a much larger impact.
Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3 questions, now 4, but last one from me.
Maybe less drugs. Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I'm polite,
Bad actors, we touched on. If Australian companies run a coal mine in Africa, it's run to an Australian set of standards because Australian shareholders demand it. It's a reasonably good coal mine. If the Australian shareholders force that company to sell the coal mine, it'll be bought by a Bulgarian or a Russian or an oligarch who doesn't give a shit, and it'll be run to Bulgarian standards. Okay. Bad actors are doing the same technology as an American company, but they're not bound even by the second best regulations that you're talking about. So what happens if you over-regulate and Mark says, I'm off to the Maldives, I'm going to base my company there and I'll be regulated by Moldovan laws?
Interesting question. Well, one, advertising dollars are what fuel all these things, right? So for context, in the United States, the average user on Facebook brings in on the order of like $55 per quarter per person on average between Canada and the United States. It's like 14.5 for Europe. I'm guessing probably because some of those languages don't have as much advertising staff to like recruit the ads. It's like $4.50 per person for the rest of the world. Though I'm guessing Australia is substantially higher, like it's probably somewhere between the European Union and the United States. Those revenues, if they're paid in Australian dollars, unless they're gonna like start taking Bitcoin or something and like do all their advertising that way, governments do have control over those processes.
The cash flow.
You have cash flows, and then things like you can shut down sites in domains. And yes, people get VPNs, but there's a lot of ways around these
I
things.
guess my question, just sorry, I know there's a queue, but it's more that if you over-regulate, you get flight.
I also think there's a thing where like I'm definitely not advocating for more than saying if you know there's a harm, you have to disclose it, and you have to tell us how you're going to fix the harm, and you need to give us enough data to know. And at this point, that's a standard that the European Union has shown is reasonable. And so going at least that thing, you know, if they're going to have to meet that bar for Europe, it's not so much to say Australians should be able to ask questions too.
So we need a global regime. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, now 4 and 5 questions. Have we got a roving mic, or are we just yelling it out? Yep, roving mic, gentleman with the cap. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was very informative. The irony that most of these photos I've taken today will be posted on Facebook is not lost on me.
And Instagram.
Yes, and I'm wondering if you've come across any companies, or do you think there'll be a breaking point where companies say, we're not going to do this anymore? I mean, most university faculties are on Twitter, on Facebook, and I was on Twitter yesterday building ads, and the content that I was fed on the feed was disgraceful, but yet we still use the platforms.
What were your ads about?
Oh, it was for a third-party company. I'm wondering if you have come across any companies that have said, no, we're not doing this anymore. And because it's like, to get into business these days, it's almost a prerequisite that you have these channels. And there's no way that you can advertise without these channels. And it's like a, you know, how do we move forward type situation.
So the question, how do we move forward?
So I think there is an interesting third way, which is sponsoring creators you care about. Like part of why people use online advertising platforms like Facebook is because it is the lowest cost provider. But there are ways of things like the reason you see sponsored by on YouTube videos is people have said, I really believe in the work. Oh, we went out again.
Anyone know what happened to the microphone?
The advertisers
What
hurt
happened
us.
last time, and can we do
Yeah.
the same trick this time, please?
So
Is there
no-
some sort of control?
Oh, there we go.
Someone treading on a lead or
I
something?
think part of why it is more cost effective to do these algorithmically targeted ads, but I think there's a huge value in saying what relationship do you want to have with your consumer. And the idea that we would fund more money directly into the creator economy, I think, is also really powerful, right? A world where we have more people producing deeply researched videos and that kind of thing is a really, really powerful. The last thing is you asked for an example of a company. Lush Cosmetics has done this. They said we are just not going to do online. We're not going to do online ads anymore.
Okay, thank you. There's a question just over there. Yep.
Hi, Francis. Thank you for your talk. I have a question about VR and AR, and I imagine as time goes on, eventually you can sort of create adversarial, you can basically use that for warfare as well and things like that. So do you think that there's a way in which the legislations currently being passed for social media will set a precedent for VR and AR, or do you think that's going to be a completely different ballgame and be a whole new level of problems that will arise? Thank you.
So the way at least the Digital Services Act is worded is they talk about the concept of a very large platform. So, an AR system or VR system, given people connect socially on it, it could be a social platform. If it impacted more than 10% of people in the European Union, it would count as a very large platform. I think the conversations around the metaverse are nowhere near where they need to be because it seems ridiculous, right? The weird little people with no legs, the weird Mark persona thing. But the thing I've been saying since they did their pivot to the metaverse is we need to be really careful about laughing about it because in tech, the headsets will get cheaper, they'll get lighter, they'll get better, faster, better visuals. Even the difference between what Quest came out with and what Apple came out with, we keep moving ahead. And I really worry it's going to end up being a mechanism for social isolation, right? If you look at the book that the term the metaverse came from, it was a world in which people, because they were economically marginalized, they isolated themselves in the metaverse. And I worry we'll put our senior citizens there instead of building senior centers, or we'll have rural or isolated people be more and more there.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. when do you think personal accountability will ever come into this? We actually had a conviction of 2 parents who allowed their kid to have a gun. I don't know how many more decades it's going to take for, First Amendment versus parent, and turn off the notifications. What's hard about this?
So one, like we really are in a bubble, right, where the vast majority of the parents of kids who are 10 or older did not grow up with social media. And, there aren't manuals on this is how you parent with social media. And there are starting to be, I've actually been really shocked even talking to NGOs in Australia about how kids' wellness in Australia is conceptualized versus in the United States. So in the United States, there's like very established big movements around tackling whole schools instead of individual kids. Because when you do it, a parent, 2 parents at a time, then it becomes a constant conflict between the kid and the parents. It's like you are the bad parent because you're holding out on the phone. With things like Wait for 8 in the US, they'll go into a whole elementary school and say, hey, we as a community are agreeing no cell phones till 14. And when that kid starts begging at 11, you can say, we already signed our pledge. Like we're not doing phones until 14. And instead of having it be like you are the holdout parent.
Okay, I've got a question here, then woman just in the second row there, and then Ed in the front, and we're just about out of time.
Francis, I was just wondering about the Global South, and particularly when I was at the Cambridge Disinformation Summit last year, I think it was Bellingcat talked about the disinformation campaigns that were going in non-English language areas, particularly the Global South. I wonder if you could talk to that in terms of the way Facebook addressed the Global South.
Totally. So like that was why. So it's interesting. In the United States, the public perception of who I am is very strongly the nice lady who cares about the kids, which is just shocking to me because like my core issue when I came forward was that when we focus on content over the design of systems, we intentionally leave behind all but the top 10, 20 languages, right? That suicide cluster, the network, it was spoken Norwegian. I think they didn't have any moderators that were looking at that content or any detection systems because the language wasn't big enough. When it comes to the Global South, the problem is they went into a lot of countries in that region and destroyed the chance for free internet, right? Businesses won't have their own webpage. They'll have a Facebook page because that's the assumption where people go look. You won't have a newspaper. You'll have a 5 million person Facebook group. And so these are the places where Facebook is still growing. It's not growing in the United States. It's shrinking in the United States. And so the very same places where Facebook is growing, they have the fewest safety systems and they get the least resources. And that's just dangerous.
Okay, yes, please.
Hi, Francis. Thanks so much for being here today. I've got a question regarding your first part of your presentation, which is basically around social terrorism. All right, so social terrorism is this new form of being able to have a voice via social media and how Facebook and Instagram can sort of influence that. Having been in Arab Spring, the telecommunication systems were shut down and all we had to communicate was what is now known as X, I think. Yeah, Twitter, right? So what we do is we understand chatter.
And Facebook groups,
And Facebook groups, right, exactly. So we knew how to mobilize, we knew how to get around, we knew where the threat was coming from. And Arab Spring, when we were there, was pretty scary. If we totally regulate all of Facebook and the rest of it, we lose a lot of chatter, but we do shut down the social terrorism. So what are your thoughts on that?
So one of the things I always remind people is in 2010, there were no algorithms in the newsfeed, right? Like in 2010, we had something that was much closer to an email inbox, right? Like you saw information because a person put information in front of you, not because a central corporation said, we're letting you see this, or like this is the highest priority things. And that also meant that you didn't have mega groups, right? You can organize movements using smaller scale, human scale social media. It's not a question of like, do we get rid of all social media? Do we break encryption? I am strongly against breaking encryption. The question is, do we have systems where the content that goes the most hyper-viral is the most extreme content? And so the question isn't even, do we ban that? It's a question of, we need to have feedback loops, right? Like one of the things I've suggested is if you don't want to pass something like the Canadian bill, something like the DSA, an in-between option might be to just say, if you have a content moderation system, you have to tell us what it is. And you have to tell us what languages it's in. You have to give some performance data for each one of those language system pairs, just so we can know if your marketing message aligns with what you're actually doing. And then you have to show us some content that you distribute. Show us your most popular posts. Show us everything that gets more than 10,000 views so we can know what you're rewarding. And you need to give us a random sample of the public content so we can know of the stuff you could have chosen from, what did you send viral? And if that's all you do, companies will behave better because the advertisers will shame them. You can have an ecosystem of people like me that make YouTube videos analyzing it all. But all of that is impossible. That whole public digestion system is impossible if we don't have access to the truth.
Last question, Ed.
So thank you for this energetic and enthusiastic and sort of very lively defense of, just exposition of what's going on. So my question is, a lot is going to happen. A lot is going to depend on this 44-state lawsuit, right? Congress will follow. They're going to look what's happening. How do you expect this is going to play out?
So the limitations of solving, so in the United States, we occasionally run into problems that very clearly we should have dealt with, but we just couldn't get around to. So tobacco was the first one. So we knew for 20 years that it was causing cancer. There were a few states that really were profited a lot from it. We couldn't get anywhere. We needed the AGs to step in. Opiates, same thing. Now there's this lawsuit. You can get some things from a settlement. You can get big things from a settlement. We might get more transparency, at least for under 18-year-olds. That's not going to help us with adults. But you can't put in an ongoing, evolving system like you can with the Digital Services Act. And so my hope is we get enough out of the settlement. At a minimum, we're going to cut off under 16-year-olds. We're going to make it so that Facebook has to kind of confront the costs that they've inflicted. But we need to actually act if we want to have a governance system that can evolve over time. For example, the metaverse and things like that. There are going to be other metaverses than Facebook. We have to deal holistically with these things.
I remind everybody, progress is neither inevitable
Or linear.
or linear. It happens because you make it happen. And it sometimes bumps around, goes backwards and forwards and lurches about, but it happens because people care enough to get involved and make it happen. And that requires an information base, which is what this has been all about.
And if I can remind one more thing. People often go, oh my goodness, this is so big. It's so intimidating. Like, how are we ever going to do this? Like, it's so disruptive. It's chaotic, whatever. Every single communication technology we have ever invented was extremely disruptive, right? The printing press initially was actually not that disruptive because no one could read. Right? It was like a few percentage points of Europe could read. They're mostly monks, not even the nobles. It didn't matter that much. But you started teaching lots and lots of people to read, and you got chaos. You got the witch trials. You got revolutions. It was bad. Like a third of Europe died in some parts. But we learned, we evolved. We developed newspapers, ways of actually doing things in responsible ways, sending people to school. Newspapers. We had wars over misinformation in newspapers. But we learned, we responded, we evolved. We got journalism schools. We got journalistic, oversight organizations.
We got regulation of the media.
Radio, having the ability to have a personal relationship with your leader led to the rise of a lot of the dictators in World War II. But we learned, we invested in public media. We got regulation. We learned, we evolved, we adapted. And we are going to learn and evolve and adapt again.
Why can't we just declare these mega companies to be publishers and governed and regulated in exactly the same way as legacy media?
That's a really good question. So it feels really obvious. So it's like they're clearly in control of a bunch of these things. Like we should do it that way. We know how we talked about over and over again. We have to find it first. Like we have to find the bad thing to reduce it, to promote it, those kinds of things. Part of why I'm such a firm advocate for the laws that target these platforms from an information asymmetry perspective of saying you need to disclose your risks, you need to show us how you're going to reduce those risks versus saying you are responsible for each piece of content is what we have seen over and over again is it leads to radical over-enforcement. So even in innocuous situations, so I'll give you an example, violence against women on Facebook. So you are not allowed to commit violence against women on Facebook, very reasonable. I have talked to advocates around the world at this point. It could be in Germany, it could be in France, it could be in Brazil, it could be in the Netherlands. It doesn't matter where. And they say my entire team has lost their accounts on Facebook because the systems, the AIs, they will never be able to understand the nuance and sophistication of, is this bad, is this good? And I'll give you a defense of AIs, which is actually, an acknowledgement of our own frailty, which is if we polled the people in this room about 2 sentences, we put them up there and we said, do these 2 sentences mean basically the same thing? We would only get 90% agreement, right? It's just language is nuanced and complicated. And so we need to write laws around incentives instead of around content if we want to be able to actually have vibrant, diverse dialogues.
It's been wonderful to be able to pick your brains, to be able to hear of your experiences and to understand some of the complexities of the world that you've inhabited and that you've exposed for the benefit of us and everybody else around the world. I'm sure it's enriched the lives and the understanding of the students here, as well as the academics, the teachers and blow-ins who have just wandered in off the street, wondering if there was a free feed perhaps at the expense of the University of Melbourne. It's the role of the university, it's the role of the academy to challenge the contest of ideas. That's what we've done today. We can't thank you enough. Enjoy Australia and thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.